Hi there, welcome to Play Up Podcast with myself, Scott McLachlan. Doing something different a little bit today. I wanted to branch off a little bit from the chatting with friends, some excellent friends about Pompey's fortunes, which is obviously going very well at the moment. But I wanted to do something which I call My Pompey Life, and it's basically talking to Pompey fans and people who've been involved in the football club at various levels about their experiences, memories about why they love Portsmouth Football Club. And I'm very delighted to have Colin Farmery join me today, who's the chair of the Pompey History Society and has had many a job at Fratton Park over the years, haven't you, Colin?
Yeah, quite. Yeah. I've done most things, I think. Yeah,
Yeah,
apart
I
from
think.
apart from play or manage it.
Well, there we go. Maybe one day, Colin. You never know. So I'm delighted to have you here, Colin. And you've got you started watching Pompey in the very, very early '70s, didn't you? Not an illustrious period of their history, we must say. But I'm sure you can explain to the listeners a bit better than I can.
Yeah, well, I started watching Pompey in 1970. It was the 1970-71 season. I think my first football memory was actually the Mexico '70 World Cup, and I can remember watching that on the TV at home. So I'd have been about 7 years old then. But how I actually came to go and see Pompey, I'm not totally clear in my mind, except for the fact that my uncle Roger and his wife, my auntie Jen, they lived in Gosport, and my uncle Roger was actually one of those Man United fans who started supporting Man United because of the Munich air crash and all the rest of it. But he did have a soft spot for Pompey. He was living in Gosport, and my auntie Jen, she was from Gosport as well. And I'd actually been in hospital sort of like at the back end of sort of like August, early September 1970, and I'd come out of hospital and I was recuperating. I actually started my junior school a little bit late, but one of the things to cheer me up was my uncle and auntie. My uncle Roger and Auntie Jen suggested that they took me to Fratton Park to go and see a match, and so I went round to their flat in sort of like a Beaumont Court in Elson in Gosport, and we kind of got ourselves ready, went round in the car to Fratton Park. And it was a Wednesday night, so it was a floodlit game. So I remember going, and I remember looking up and seeing the floodlight tower on the north side. We obviously went through the turnstile. We actually had seats, quite good seats, in the North Stand G section. So
Do you remember how much you paid, Colin? How much
uh,
was it then?
well, I don't think I paid at all at 7 years old. I
Well,
kind of like didn't have much in the way of pocket money then to kind of like to splash out on things like that. But I remember we got a program, which I still have, that original one, the first one that I kind of
okay.
had. I remember getting hold of a program which was kind of like a souvenir of that particular occurrence. Of the game itself, I can remember nothing. Of the actual kind of, I suppose I've got an impression of kind of a floodlit field and greenery, and I fell asleep probably in the second half because I was probably way past my bedtime by the time the game was ended. But that kind of like sowed a seed, and so from that moment on, I was a Pompey fan. Funnily enough, my next game was at the Dell. So about a couple of months later, I'd seen Pompey beat Walsall 1-0, so I was now a Pompey fan. Norman Piper scored the goal. But the next game that my uncle Roger took me to was a game at the Dell to see Saints play Newcastle.
Because Pompey fans used to
And
do that in those days, didn't they? That's something that
yeah,
possibly people don't realise these days. That because I guess away travel was so expensive and quite not for the masses, that Pompey fans would pop down the road and see a Saints match.
well, they would, except in this particular instance, one of the reasons why we were going, it was a friend of my uncle Roger's was a Newcastle fan, so my first Saints game was with a Newcastle fan, so therefore it was a habit I never really lost in that way. So that whenever I went to, because I went to the Dell quite a lot in the early 1970s as well. But generally speaking, I usually went with somebody who was supporting the opposition. So it was a habit that I've never really broken ever since.
You felt
So,
safer, did you then, being an away fan rather than a home one?
it was just the way it was. I mean, and this isn't a Southampton podcast, but I've got great memories of the Dell, and I remember going into the Polygon Hotel, probably about 1974 it would have been, and in the Polygon Hotel we were in the bar before the game, and Dennis Law was playing for Manchester City, and Dennis
Right.
Law came swanning into the bar, went up to the bar to order a cup of tea. So it's been about 1 o'clock or something, 1:30. So yeah, how professional footballers lived in those days is a little bit different perhaps than how it is today. Anyway, I digress. To come back to the Pompey story, so that 1970-71 season, I think one of the things that I very early kind of got to know was that Grandstand used to have a thing called the teleprinter at the end of the day, which would kind of chalk out the kind of the final scores. And I can remember I think the first time I can remember the teleprinter was one of those classic days where it kind of like spelt out the number of goals in a game, because it kind of came up, ding, 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 Carlisle 6 brackets SIX close brackets Portsmouth 0. So that was an early memory of the old teleprinter. And then my next game at Fratton Park was against Sheffield United in the FA Cup, and I've got more memories of that game, to be honest, because I lived in Stubbington, and I can remember getting the bus with my Uncle Roger up to Fareham bus station, and I can remember going on the train from Fareham station up to Fratton Park, walking up to Goldsmith Avenue to get to the game. I think when we were actually in the ground, then we were in the south enclosure, sort of like the Fratton side of the south enclosure, and we, as was the wont of kids in those days, I was right down the kind of front watching it. And I remember for Christmas I got a little kind of like rattle that was small enough for me to be able to kind of do, and I can remember wailing, flailing this kind of rattle around and cracking my uncle's nose on the face, on nose as I did it, which didn't amuse him particularly. I think I got my photograph taken. I think there was a news photographer or somebody got some kids out from the crowd and took a picture. And I can remember, that's a game where I can remember the crowd celebrating, kind of like it probably was the second goal of the game that clinched the game 2-0 for Pompey. So I've got a vague memory of the celebrations of that. But probably my most distinct memory of that game was as we were walking out the ground with my uncle, and I kind of turned around to him and said to him, "Well, that's good. There's 2 more points for Pompey." And he said, No, he said, this was an FA Cup game, this was. So they don't get any points for those. They just go through to the next round. So that was a lesson that I learned around sort of the fact that there were league and cup games, and they were kind of different things and so on. So that was part of my sort of football education, I suppose. And I think by this time as well, I think I'd established the fact that I really, really liked the regularity of it, and that kind of like idea of sort of like statistics and games and it being a regular kind of like thing that happened every week. And then you looked at the league tables and saw how the team had got on, and Pompey were about 16th, I think, generally speaking, in the second division that season, and I quite like that. So I'm not particularly mathematical, but on the other hand, I've always really liked statistics and kind of crunching numbers and that in that way. Final game I saw that season was actually I did go to the Dell again. I went to see Chelsea play. They had that great team with kind of Osgood and Bonetti and Peter Houseman and stuff, and that was with my friend Andrew, who was a Chelsea fan. So kind of keeping it kind of going. We stood. I think we stood at the Archers Road in that game. So that was a great thing to go and see Chelsea play. That was probably the biggest crowd I've been in by that stage, because there was probably about 25,000-30,000 there at the Dell that day.
They were champions, weren't they? Champions Chelsea at the time.
I think they were FA Cup winners. They
That's
came
right,
to the Dell as FA Cup winners. So I think they won the Cup Winners' Cup that season as well. So they were a good side. I've got no recollection of the game whatsoever, but I can remember standing in the Dell for that one. And then my final game that season was against Millwall. So Pompey played Millwall towards the end of the season. I think the season had sort of tailed off as it normally did in that way. I think we got knocked out of the cup by Arsenal, and after that it was back to kind of mid-table or lower mid-table kind of second division mediocrity, and it was probably summed up by that game against Millwall, which we lost 2-0. And I think that was the game. I remember Jim Standen played in goal for Pompey that day. I think because I think John Milkins had broken his arm in a game at Sheffield Wednesday, sort of like a few days beforehand. So the regular goalie was out, and Jim Standen stood in for him. But again, I haven't really got a great deal many more memories of that one particularly.
Pompey ended up 16th in the end. But I mean,
sounds about right.
They had a great start to the season. I mean, didn't lose a game until mid-September.
Yeah.
So they were a half decent League Two team, and obviously eventually lost to Arsenal in the cup to the winners that year, weren't they? The old
they did.
The Charlie George winner, that famous goal.
Well, and I think one of the things about supporting Pompey in those kind of years as well was and bringing back my sort of love of stats really in that sense. And and I kind of very it's probably the next season I was bought my first ever Rothmans football yearbook, sort of 71 too. But I do remember kind of they used to have those great charts in books where they did the FA Cup, and you kind of went down sort of like third round, and then it narrowed down to the fourth round and fifth round and so on and so forth. And one of the things that always used to that I picked up quite quickly was that quite often Pompey kind of played against the winners. So in 1967, I think Spurs won the cup that year, and we'd actually been knocked out by them in the fourth round. In 1968, I think West Brom won the cup that year, and they knocked Pompey out in the fifth round. And then, of course, we had the Arsenal team who did the double. They'd knocked Pompey out as well. So I kind of Pompey had a habit of getting knocked out by certainly, if not the winners, certainly the Wembley finalists that year, which sort of struck me as vaguely interesting. And so it kind of began to I think by that time I was I'd be 8 by then. But I was very much, I think very early on, I kind of fairly knew my stuff in terms of, I could tell you what Pompey were doing and how well they were doing. And I remember I used to read the news and kind of, I think it was Reg Betts did the reports back in those days. But I remember once seeing Pompey used to advertise in the news. So they had a little advert for the next forthcoming attraction at Fratton Park. And I remember there was an advert for, this would have been very early on, shortly after I'd been to my first game. And I remember seeing an advert for a friendly that Pompey were playing against MSV Duisburg, which was a German team that Portsmouth was twinned with. Yep. And I remember asking my uncle, could we go to that particular game? But he didn't fancy a friendly on a Tuesday night. So yeah, we never got to that one, which is a bit of a shame. I'd quite fancied seeing that game. So that's kind of my first season, I suppose, in a nutshell. And I suppose at the end of that season, another very distinct. You mentioned Charlie George and the winning goal in the 1971 Cup final. That was the first Cup final that I remember watching as a kid. I didn't watch Chelsea Leeds the season before, and I think I was probably quite unusual then because I think most people wanted Liverpool to win, as I remember, but I decided I was going to support Arsenal that day, and I actually had. I think Arsenal played in yellow tops and blue shorts the
gold top,
and I had a blue set of shorts that was in my first Pompey kit I'd got the previous Christmas. So I had a Pompey shirt with the socks and a blue pair of shorts. So I used the blue shorts, and I had a sort of like a mustardy yellow T-shirt. So I wore that on the day as well. So I was up in Arsenal colours that day, and we were quite fortunate then because we actually had a colour telly. So we had, I think my Uncle Roger was round watching it with us because he only had a black and white or something, and he was supporting Liverpool, but I was supporting Arsenal. And I do remember when Charlie George scored the winner in extra time, running around the room and kind of celebrating this great event. But it didn't persuade me to kind of like to go and support another team. But I think whenever I watch football, I can't really get into a game if I've got no stake in it.
Right.
I will always generally, if I'm watching a game, I'll try to have a reason why I want one or other team to win in it. Otherwise, I can't go and watch simply for the kind of the pleasure of it in that
For
way.
the
I think
sport of
always
it, yeah.
yeah, you need to have that. You need to have that kind of like edge to it, which just gives you, whether it can be anything, just the color of the shirts or something that makes you think, right, I prefer team X to team Y, and
Yeah.
that'll make it kind of like make the occasion all the more sweeter. Yeah, it's sort of yeah.
But I think kids used to do that. I remember doing it in the early 70s. You went come cup final day, you had to pin your colours to
Yeah,
a particular mast, didn't you? Because obviously the
you
build-up was
did.
all day in those days, and you had the cup final breakfasts, and then you might have had St and Greavesy in the morning, and then you watch video of the coaches going to Wembley and all the rest of it. But even in the playground, I remember one side of the playground would be Liverpool, and I'm a bit later, so probably my first final 77.
Right.
At Liverpool, Man United. So that I remember vividly. Anyway, so the Friday before, half the kids would be on one side of the playground in Liverpool, and half the kids would be the other side of Man
Right.
United.
Yeah.
So
Well, but I was always a bit contrary, though, contrary, I suppose, because in actual, I remember in 1973 when Leeds played Sunderland, everybody wanted Sunderland to win, but I supported Leeds that day, so it was kind of so I always
you
had a
weren't
bit
rooting
of
for the underdog then.
no, we were, I did quite like Leeds really, but I suppose as a kid, my favourite first division team in inverted commas was probably Chelsea. I think they were quite a glamour team at that point, so
Yeah.
I did sort of have a soft spot for Chelsea. I remember them beating some Luxembourg team 13-0 or something. So it's kind of, those sort of things stick in your mind as well.
So Ray Hiram was top scorer that season. I think you
Yeah.
mentioned was he your favourite player of that era?
Yeah, I mean, he was, and it was the Gosport connection because my uncle and auntie were living in Gosport. I learnt very early on that kind of Ray was from Gosport, and although he didn't play for Gosport, he played for Fareham when he signed for Pompey. But that was that for me was a kind of a big draw to him. But of course, he was somebody who kind of was an integral part of that Pompey team, and he kind of scored goals for us, and he had a distinctive physique as well because he's very tall and kind of beanpoley in that way. And I remember once, this would have been early 70s. He was a guest of somebody at the chief petty officers mess at HMS Dayless, where because my dad was still in the Navy at that point, and we used to go to the chief's mess. But I remember him and my mum went to an event at the chief's mess in Gosport, and Ray Hiram was there, and I've still got somewhere he signed the program or something, and I've got his autograph. So that's one of my sort of kind of possessions that I've hung on to throughout 50 odd years.
Yeah. So so Pompey were pretty average at the early 70s. So it's a good job that you did like it for the stats. Yeah, it's a good job you did like it for the stats because there probably wasn't an awful lot of entertaining football going on. And the club itself, it's fair to say, was struggling infrastructure and financially wise. Now you said that you obviously the late 70s when we perked up and we finally probably reached rock bottom, and the only way was up when we finally went down to Division 4. I think you probably more than anyone know in detail what those mid 70s years were like for Pompey and where the problems stemmed from. So I think people would like to hear, possibly, why we fell from, League One to League Four in 10 or so years, and also, how did the club recover itself?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think to be honest, the roots of it probably go back to when Pompey were champions of England back in the late 1940s and early 1950s, and we were the best team in the land. And I think, probably 1955 was the last time we seriously challenged for the the First Division, Premier League in new money kind of like title in that way. And I think basically that the club ran out of people prepared to put in the level of money you needed to put in order to maintain a First Division football club. So I think from the late 50s, early 60s, they were casting around as a football club for ways in which they could raise revenue. I think they did a share issue in 1960, which was kind of like, average at best. And then during the 60s, they had a manager called George Smith, who was he was a taskmaster, but he was also a bit of a visionary, I suppose, in some ways, in the sense that he at least he tried to think outside the box. And he came up with a scheme in the mid 1960s where we'd bin off our reserve team and our youth team, and we'd actually run, and you think of it today, we run a first team squad of sort of like 17 or 18 players, and 71 they were still running that then. So it was all around trying to cut their cloth according to the amount of money that they had. So they were in a bit of a vicious circle in that way, and they really were kind of casting around for what we would call a sugar daddy, really, somebody who wanted to get into it, to become a local hero, to kind of like to generate or provide the money that would enable Pompey to get back where I think the supporters saw was their rightful place in the First Division, and that rubbed off on me in the sense that when I was supporting Pompey in the 1970s, the older fans you kind of rub shoulders with at Fratton Park, generally speaking, they remembered those championship years, and they were telling you, well, we might be in Division 2 at the moment, or Division 3, or whenever it was, but one day we'll be back at the top table. So I grew up and thought that Pompey were a big club that had just fallen on hard times. But to come back to your kind of like question about well, where did it all go wrong? I think it all went wrong partly because they couldn't find that sugar daddy soon enough. They had a good go at promotion in 1967-8 and sort of fell a little bit short. They actually invested quite a lot of money at that time. They paid £40,000 for a forward called Mike Trebilco, who'd scored a couple of goals for Everton in the 1966 FA Cup final, and he sort of flattered to deceive, I suppose, over the course of his Pompey career. They chucked a load of money. They bought Norman Piper, who was an England under-23 international at the time in 1970, paid another £40,000 club record fee for him. And again, Norman was a great player, but he wasn't enough to kind of get them to really where they wanted to be. So I think by the 1971-72, which would have been my second season, attendances. I think one thing that younger supporters probably don't appreciate that when you went to football in the early 70s, attendances aren't like they are today. Whereas Pompey this season, our smallest attendance has probably been about 16,800, and our biggest attendance is 20,000. So there's quite a narrow kind of range. But I remember in that kind of 1970-71 season, for example, the lowest attendance would have probably been about 7,000 or 8,000, but the highest attendance was actually 40,000 for an FA Cup game. So you had far wider swings in terms of attendances. So fans were arguably more fickle, I suppose, in that day. But that was because basically they're paying on the day. So there were very few season ticket holders. You turned up, and if Pompey weren't playing well, then by and large people wouldn't bother to go. And if Pompey went on a little spurt or a little run, suddenly everyone would come out the woodwork, and we'd have a decent attendance in that way. So it was a different kind of way of running it. But I think we reached sort of rock bottom in terms of attendances probably in sort of like late 1972, and we had a game against. We had a game against Sunderland, sort of like on, I think that was about December the 9th, for argument's sake, and we had about 5,500 there for that, and Pompey were 2-1 up going into the final few minutes of the game, and they managed to concede 2 goals and lose 3-2 to Sunderland. So the following week we were playing Middlesbrough at home, and that day we had 4,600 in the ground come through the turnstiles. It was our lowest league attendance since the Second World War, still is, right, in that way. And I think in terms of that was kind of rock bottom, but then the sugar daddy turned up, and people will, most people have heard of John Deacon now. At the time he was a property developer. He was based in Southampton. The rumour mill was that he tried to get on the board at the Southampton, but they decided they didn't like the cut of his jib and sort of like rejected him. And I think Saints were quite a conservative with a small C kind of club in that way. They didn't go in for kind of like that kind of thing. So John Deacon sort of turned his attentions to Pompey. And he bought a sort of like a stake in the club in 1972. He joined the board of directors at that point, put a bit of money in. We were able to sign a few players. Ken Foggo springs to mind as one that we signed at that time. Bobby Kellogg came back for his second spell at the club. And suddenly we actually kind of, again, had a little bit of a spurt of form, got ourselves out of relegation trouble, which we were in. And then in 1970, which was my third season, I think it was the first time that kind of Pompey actually suddenly became, when I was at school, other kids were talking about Pompey, and it was because we basically started when John Deacon sort of like came along. He actually decided he was going to put a significant wedge of cash into the club at that point. And at the end of the 1972-73 season, we paid £100,000 to buy Peter Marinello, who was a winger for Arsenal, who
Yep.
sort of like not quite kind of made it at the sort of like first division level. He'd come down from Scotland. Hibernians, Arsenal had signed him. Rumor has it that kind of but basically the Pompey was it Ron Tyndall was the manager, I think, at that point, and kind of Ron Tyndall didn't think he was worth anywhere near £100,000 that we were going to pay for him, but John Deacon then kind of just went away and bought him anyway because he thought he knew better. So we signed Peter Marinello, which caused a great buzz. We also picked up, we paid some money to sign Ron Davis, who was a fantastic striker for Southampton. He'd been integral in them getting into the first division. He was sort of like coming towards the end of his career now, but Ron Davis kind of signed, and we signed a Welsh international fullback called Phil Roberts. And there was a real buzz around Pompey in 1973. It was our 75th anniversary season. Obviously we celebrated the 125th this year, and there was a real buzz about it, and Deacon was kind of ripping up the rule book. Really, we went from our blue shirts and that we'd been worn for time immemorial, was in 1912, and we were wearing a white shirt with a fancy collar and 2 blue stripes down the side of it, and I think when you look back at it, in actual fact, it was very, very kind of bold stuff that we were doing, and it certainly created a buzz around the club. And I think at the time, I think a lot of fans hated it. They kind of like the fact that you're breaking with tradition in that way, and so on and so forth. But I think as a kid, you thought this was brilliant, right? Suddenly there's all this stuff going on. People are sort of talking about your club. There's a whole kind of buzz and a vibe about it, and. But unfortunately, 1973-74 season didn't prove to be as successful as we would have liked on the pitch. Unfortunately, I think 1975-6 was just a gloriously catastrophic season. I mean, and looking back on it now, I'm very fond of it as a season, to be honest, because I've got some great memories. Because I've been then 1975, so I'd have been back 12 by then, I suppose.
Were you going on your own by then with friends, or were you all still going with family?
I was by then. I was kind of going with one of my best mates at school was a guy called Glyn, and his mum used to like going, so I used to go with Glyn's mum, and she was very enthusiastic and passionate about it. And Glyn's dad didn't like football at all, so he wasn't interested at all. But Glyn's mum loved her football, so we used to go with her, which is kind of quite good fun. But that 75-6 season was just gloriously catastrophic, really. I mean, we weren't winning games. We'd only won one, I think, against Orient, but we'd drawn quite a lot. So it was kind of, season could go either way at that point. You know, you get the Football Mail every Saturday night, and it's more doom, gloom, misery.
Sailors' thumbs were down.
Thumbs were down all the time.
Thumbs were down all the time.
I used to go down to the newsagents in Stubbington and pick the Football Mail up about sort of 6:15 or so. So I was quite regular doing that. We beat Forest away 1-0, which was a bit of a surprise that we had managed to get a result there. That was our first win since August. But we hadn't won at home all season, so we were just in this terrible cycle. I remember I saw a game. We played Bristol City on day after Boxing Day. We won at Charlton on Boxing Day, which had sort of given everybody hope that we might go on a run. And then we lost to Bristol City the next day at home. And it got so bad. I think that goal, we scored one goal against Bristol Rovers in the October, but since then, every home game, we hadn't even scored a goal. So we were losing games 1-0, 2-0. I remember losing. We were going to see us play Oxford. We lost 2-0 to Oxford at Fratton Park, and Mick Tate scored for Oxford that day. He was playing up front and scored for Oxford, and he would obviously eventually come and play for Pompey. And then we got drawn in the cup. We got drawn against Birmingham City, who were a first division team in the cup. So and that was the day where Billy Eames, I think, scored a goal for us, and it was our first goal we'd seen at Fratton Park since October. So there was a lot of celebration around that. We drew that 1-1. Right, amazingly went up to Birmingham on the Tuesday night and beat them. Bobby McGuinness scored the winner, and we beat Birmingham in the FA Cup to set up this fourth round game with Charlton. And then we played Carlisle at home on the 10th of January, and Billy Eames popped up again to score. So that was 3 goals in a week if you include Bobby McGuinness's at kind of like at Birmingham. But 2 home goals in consecutive Saturdays was a rare treat. But also we managed to keep a clean sheet against Carlisle and recorded our first home win of the season on January the 10th. So that was a
pretty grim season all told, I think.
Well, the thing is, whenever Pompey fans kind of like moan about the fact, for example, when they were moaning about the fact that we were drawing all these games under Danny Cowley, or Kenny Jackett was the worst manager, and I'm thinking, you really haven't lived. But the trouble is, some of these people who are moaning, they were around in 1975-6, so they've know
seen it
how
all,
shocking it could be. Right, and in actual fact, kind of, do you know what? Kind of finishing, winning more games than you lose. Actually, I still think it's quite a good season. So I'm kind of whatever league you're in. So,
well, let's take you on to happier times then, Colin, and so the late.
I've got more misery yet. Come on.
Oh, I know. No, I don't think our listeners could take it, Colin. To be honest, but let's try and end on a more positive note. So obviously, Pompey's fortunes picked up late in late 70s, and their first season was in Division 4, 78-79, and a respectable 7th place finish, which compared to what you were just describing, winning quite a few games and scoring quite a few goals must have been a much better experience for you.
Yeah, I mean, it was because I think, as I said, that was the first season where I'd seen a Pompey team that I supported win more than they'd lost, and also finish in the top half of the table. So, to be honest, that season we were well in the running for kind of promotion. To be honest, right up until probably about middle of April, where we finally tailed off and weren't going to make it. So it was a really, really exciting season. And the kind of the 2 previous seasons in the 3rd division have been pretty grim. We just avoided relegation at the end of the 77 season. Jimmy Dickinson pulled us out of the mire, and then Jimmy won't really cut up to it. So 77-78 was an absolutely catastrophic season, worse than 75-6, but never had that sort of defining kind of like 9-match losing streak or not scoring goals. So there were a few sort of ups in that season, but 78-9 was brilliant, and I was just getting into sort of in 78. I'd have been 15 then, I suppose. So I was just getting into going to away games on I wouldn't say a regular basis, but I remember, where did we go? I remember going to Aldershot That would have been about September 78. And we were actually suddenly on this run where I think we were undefeated for 6 or 7 matches, and we didn't concede a goal. I think we beat Crewe 3-0 on the early September, and then we went on a run where we I think we won 5 and drew 2 or something, and didn't concede a goal in this, which was really breathtakingly brilliant compared to what had gone before. So I remember going to Aldershot, and there was a big Pompey turnout that day. I think the gate was probably about 10,000, but there was probably half of them were Pompey fans, at least I would have thought, maybe more. And we won that game 2-0. And it was Steve Foster's birthday, and I can remember the crowd singing happy birthday to Steve Foster, who was a Portsmouth boy who was playing in the Pompey team at that time. And then the following week, we played on the Friday night. We played down at Bournemouth, and again, likewise, I think the gate was about 10,000, and Pompey took about 6,000 or 7,000 at that game, and that was where it all sort of fell apart, because we lost to Bournemouth 3-1, which is a bit of a disappointment. But then, to be fair, up until kind of Christmas, we continued to do quite well. We'd signed a striker from on free transfer from Port Vale called Jeff Emmerman, who was scoring loads of goals, and Jeff became a favourite of mine because I ended up modelling my Sunday League game on him.
And mine.
Right?
He had a great set of hair on him, didn't he?
He had a fantastic permed set of hair, which I didn't have even then. I think he scored about 15 goals by Christmas or something. So Dave Kemp had kind of done likewise, sort of like, in 76-7, which was again, but it was kind of things like hat tricks, right? I think Dave Kemp scored hat trick in April 1977. It was the first Pompey hat tricks for about 7 or 8 years. Just ridiculous things like that. But yeah, Jeff was a hero of mine, and there were some good players in that team. We signed Peter Mellor, the goalie, who was a larger than life kind of character, who was great fun. Who else was in that team? Kind of Colin Garwood was in that team.
I was going to say Garwood and Hemmerman contributed 31 goals between them.
Indeed, no, they were a potent pair between them. They were sort of like the likes of local lad like Peter Denyer and Dave Puller were in the side. Steve Foster, of course, as well.
Lee Barnard,
kind of people of Billy Wilson. Lee Barnard was doing some stuff. So it was sort of John Lathan was in midfield, although he didn't have a particularly good time at Pompey. But it was a team you kind of got quite fond of. And then what happened was we went to Wimbledon on Boxing Day, and Wimbledon were in the promotion race with us. They'd just been elected to the Football League the season before. We went to Wimbledon, and I didn't go to the game, but I remember in those days Radio Solent used to go over to the ground every now and again, and we won at Wimbledon 4-2 on Boxing Day, and I think we were second to Reading in the table. We beaten Reading 4-0 on the weekend before Christmas. We beat Wimbledon 4-2 on Boxing Day, and I think everybody thought at that point, right, this is it. Kind of we've beaten 2 of our promotion rivals. We're going to go up, and then we went to Stockport on a couple of days later. And lost there 4-2, and then it snowed, right? And literally we had our game called off against Newport on New Year's Day because of the snow, and there was snow on the ground more or less for probably about 2.5 months. It was really kind of very cold winter, and we just lost our rhythm completely, to be honest. We drew with bottom of the table Rochdale on a frozen pitch, and lost at Wimbledon lost at Wigan rather on a pitch they covered in straw and peat and stuff to get the game on. Struggled. Didn't win again until we beat Newport, I think end of February, and then I remember going on a minibus all the way up to Halifax on the 3rd of March 1979. And Halifax in the late 1970s does what it's what you imagine it would be in that way. It was a pretty kind of grim place at the best of times, and it was a grim ground and kind of like cinders around it, and there was snow piled up all around the place because they'd had snow a lot worse than we had. And Halifax hadn't won at home since August. And we managed to lose 2-0 there, and I think that was where the wheels we finally accepted had kind of come off. And despite our best efforts, I think we signed Steve Bryant or something before the transfer deadline day. We just couldn't get going again consistently. And then, of course, Jimmy Dickinson had his heart attack at Barnsley on the when would it have been? Yeah, end of March. So that was a big shock as well. And so the season fizzled out, but I still regard it as a successful one, and one of my kind of more fonder ones that I cannot recall. I remember going to Newport County and we won there 2-1. That was a great day out. That was, and by this time I was going with my mates to away games, so I was kind of 16 then. So I had a mate, Bob Marchant, at kind of like at school and college, who I got on well with, and we used to go on coaches together. Ted Burridge used to run coaches that we used to get on and go, and occasionally minibuses. So it was kind of a great time to be going to football, really, in that way, and sort of like breaking out on your own. So yeah, that was good. So
well, that season probably laid the foundations for I guess the successful season that followed. So under Frank Burrows, Pompey finally started its comeback to climb the divisions, which we know eventually led to the Premier League, or a brief flirtation with Division 1, obviously in the 80s and 90s. But obviously, younger people will remember us obviously in the Premier League, 20 years ago. But this is my first full season as well as a Pompey fan going regularly, and that kit, obviously, you can see it behind me. Is an iconic kit. I wish I had one of the tracksuit tops, to be honest, because they were the Admiral kit was one of I think a lot of people's favourites. But
I've got one.
Have you? Oh, if the club shop want to stop them, they can take whatever money they want from me. I definitely want one.
Yeah, quite.
Again, that 79-80 season, I didn't really realise Garwood and Hemmerman, even got more. They actually made. I think it was 32 goals that season between them. But you also had a lot of goals from midfield from the likes of my fave far post Terry Brisley and Joe Laidlaw as well, chipped in with 17 goals. So goals all through the side, and we managed to do it on goal difference on the final day, didn't we?
Indeed. Well, that and I think 79-80, it kind of remains, for many Pompey fans, certainly in my era, sort of like an iconic season in lots of ways. Because I mean, at the start of that season, we were just scoring goals for fun, left, right, and centre. I remember we scored 6 against Gunthorpe and 5 against York and 4 against Darlington and blah blah blah. 4 against Bradford City, brilliant game at Fratton Park, 23,000.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Just extraordinary stuff. I'd managed to get knocked off my bike riding home from college, and I missed the Darlington game because I was in hospital with a fractured skull, which kind of just that cramped my style for 2 or 3 weeks. But I was back for the Bradford game on the 23rd of October that year. So yeah, I mean, and I think the thing is, although we eventually won promotion that season, it was kind of a tight run thing. We should have won promotion more comfortably than we did, and we ended up needing Peterborough to do us a favour and beating Bradford on the last day of the season when we were at Northampton. But again, that season was the one where I really started going to away games regularly. So from sort of Christmas onwards that season, I think I did most of the away games then. So I was very much, whatever money I was earning through doing part-time jobs and babysitting and God knows what I used to do, that money was being recycled straight away to go and see Pompey play away. So was
that on the Pompey specials you used to go on? Yeah.
Yeah, I did the Pompey specials sometimes, not always. Probably Ted Burridge was a bloke who ran coaches from sort of Fareham, so that he was my go-to kind of person. Occasionally, I might do it a bit differently and go on the train or something, or and then as we got older, then you got cars and stuff, so you went in a mate's car. But certainly in the late 70s, early 80s, it was. Coaches were my default method of getting to away games.
So did you go to the final game at Northampton?
Yeah, no, went to that Northampton game. No, we went on Ted's coach to that, and I remember we stopped off at Newbury on the way home and kind of just had a bit of a celebration there. And it was a curious one. And I get, younger fans today wouldn't understand it. But I remember being there was a sort of like a half terrace behind one goal at Northampton, because it was a cricket ground, so it wasn't fully across the end. And we were stood on that end, and in actual fact, it took a relatively long time for it to be confirmed that Pompey had actually got promoted. That win had been enough, because there wasn't quite that instantaneous knowing when a goal goes in. You were literally at the mercy of kind of like people ringing up on the telephone, reporters ringing up on the telephone to Peterborough to try to get through to somebody to find, and it wasn't straightforward by any means. And I do remember milling around sort of like on the terrace and pitch at Northampton, and you kind of occasionally some people would start cheering, so you thought, well, maybe that's kind of good news. But it was a quite strange, really, in that sense. There wasn't that. Whereas these days, instantly whether it happened, unless of course VAR kicked in, and that might kind of screw you over. But generally speaking, it was a different way to win promotion, I think, in lots of ways. Not better, not worse, just different.
Yeah. So I'm like, my son's 7, so this will, if Pompey go up this season, or when, hopefully, this will be his first promotion, and he's been going since he was 2 or 3, and knows that we were an okay side, but not very great. Not like this season, where obviously we've got a very, very good side and winning lots of games and scoring some great goals and watching some great football. But how did you feel as a Pompey fan after 10 years of mediocre? How did once you finally tasted success with Pompey, did that feel different? Did you feel different afterwards? Because it had been downwards up until then, hadn't it?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think so. I think in the end, probably because I've been brought up thinking, well, we're at the very least a kind of a Division 2 team in that way. It was sort of like the world starting to tilt back onto its correct axis, I think, was probably the way in which I'd kind of think about it. I think there was a bit of a euphoria around, though, and I remember the kind of the bus parade around Portsmouth on the Monday afterwards, and I think I was actually working in the club shop then, so I think I managed to bum my way onto one of the buses, and I ended up in the Guildhall. I was on the Guildhall steps that day, looking down on the crowd. So that was quite a good memory, for sure. And that was a good day, the day on the Guildhall Square. I think one of the disappointments is in actual fact there wasn't a football mail from that day, because I think the NUJ were on strike. So there was a restricted kind of service with the news, and while there was a report on the game on the Monday, there wasn't actually anything a football mail that day, which is a bit of a shame. It would have been nice to have had that one in the collection.
Perhaps the History Society should do one.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, we'll make one up. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, kind of recreate what it would have looked like.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Colin, thank you so much. An awesome pleasure. Thank you so much. I mean, I'm definitely going to get you back, because we've got another 30, 40 years to get through. So, we've got quite a few episodes, and Pompey, if nothing, give you lots to talk about, really. So we're not one of these clubs who do things by halves. We're either very, very good or very, very bad. So
yeah, indeed. Well, and I think you and I have both got a few stories about when we were very, very bad, haven't we? Really?
Absolutely.
So that makes an episode in itself.
Well, you talked about people. I was going to chip in earlier, but I didn't want to get in the way of your flow. So you talking about people making their minds up when they paid on the day about whether they go and see Pompey or not. Me and my friends used to do that in the mid-90s, when Pompey were pretty terrible for 3 or 4 seasons, and kept clinging on to their Division 2 status, and we literally would go to the Devonshire Arms. And at 5-3, look at our watches and go, shall we bother today? And just go back and order another pint and then carry on drinking out in town or somewhere, because we just couldn't bring ourselves to walk through the turnstile.
Indeed. Well, I think I think there's a few stories. So we'll do the 1980s next.
Absolutely, Colin. I can't wait. Thank you so much. Thank you. And that was our first ever Play Up Pompey podcast, or Play Up podcast, to do with my Pompey life with the excellent Colin Farmery. Thank you, Colin, and I'll definitely speak to you again. Thank you.
Look forward to it. Yeah. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.